So I had to refilm the second part of this video where I actually like dive into this book. I sure know how to yap. Anyways, I have a little outline for this video, and since I grew up in like a conservative Christian community in which I had to go to like church every Sunday and stuff like that, I'm very used to like the structure of a sermon in which the first part of the sermon is basically like a relatable story, and then the rest of it is kind of like a segue into like scripture. So I want to talk about like a funny story. So basically, when I was little, I asked my mom, like, what would you do if the world was consumed by darkness and there was one little last glimmer of light and hope? Wouldn't it be your duty as a Christian or a spiritual person to protect that light from being extinguished and being swallowed by darkness? And she was like, no. And I don't blame her, because she's probably like, what the hell is my kid asking me this for? Like, she probably was overworked and just finished a long day of work, so what was the point of that? Anyways, I think it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of us feel like that, where it's like 99% of the world is just darkness, and there's this one last shred of light and hope and positivity and inclusion, and it's just being snuffed out by all of these like negative forces that we have to face in our day-to-day lives. So the title of this video is Your Spiritual Practice is Supposed to Be Ugly, and I stand by that because growing up on the internet, because the internet did raise me in a lot of ways, because I was like the guinea pig and like generation for the internet as being like Gen Z. And I feel like new age spiritual practices tend to, first off, culturally appropriate a lot of the time, and they're obsessed with like crystals and their spiritual practice being like aesthetically pleasing. And I wrote down, like, your spiritual practice doesn't need to be surrounded by incense, candles, shrines, or a perfectly annotated or aesthetically pleasing scripture. You should be able to like pray or meditate anywhere on your commute to work, even when it's noisy and overstimulating, because you are one with the sounds and the smells and the sights of like human suffering. If you overhear like yelling or crying or like dogs barking, just like chaos in general, you are one with the restlessness and the suffering of the world. And I wrote this down when I was still living in Portland, in downtown Portland, in a very like dense urban area, and I was very like overstimulated, and I didn't have a car, so I couldn't like easily access the nature around me. And it was just as a way of trying to like cope with the overstimulation, like on my bus ride to my internship and stuff like that, I would just tell myself, you know, I am one with human suffering. And I've always felt that to be true, because I feel like I've always struggled with like isolation and loneliness growing up. So even though my suffering may not feel the same or compare, it may not be an exact copy of another person's suffering, because we each have our own cross to bear, so to speak. I feel like the chaos and the suffering we inhabit in our souls, it coexists with perfection and goodness and the divine and stuff like that. So it's kind of like this yin and yang balancing act that's going on within ourselves. However, it is your responsibility to take action towards the alleviation of suffering as part of your practice towards spirituality, and you shouldn't just resort to prayer or meditation as a form of transcendental escapism. Like, often it can be tempting, if you've been practicing meditation for a while, to use it as a form of escapism, like it's better than like doom scrolling, but it's still a temptation to just immerse yourself in the spiritual realm and to not take action in the real world. But in reality, we need to balance meditation with selfless action in our communities. And that's really how you have to like follow this, like, you know, path towards spirituality is just blending the two. And so I think it's important to talk about because of the political climate that we're entering. It kind of reminds me of high school because, of course, President Trump was like elected in 2016, and I just feel like we're seeing a resurgence of bigotry and small-mindedness and this division that's being encouraged by the media, and it's just, I don't know, it's a lot. So just like view that as encouragement, where it's like we should take selfless action knowing that it won't have any consequences. Like, take action while knowing that it won't change anything and it won't have a significant effect on a systemic level. Do it anyway as a part of your spiritual practice, and support your community members who are marginalized, who are struggling. And of course, it's not going to change the policies in place that make their life harder. It's not going to change the bigoted attitudes of those around you, but perhaps by extending that empathy and understanding to other people, hopefully it can make their lives slightly better. Also, like, there's this article called Love as Political Resistance, and it really resonated with me because I think this also reminds me of this class I took in linguistics, as an example from Martin Luther King Jr., where he took the term love, which its connotation is usually associated with like softness and tenderness, and he turned it on its head by assigning a new meaning to love, that it can be hard, it can have tangible effects, it can be direct, and love as political action, I think, is really empowering. Love is not just softness, it's also a hard, tangible reality. And so the revolution will not be funded. You're not going to be rewarded for standing up for those who are misunderstood. You're going to have a lot of pushback for doing that. You're going to be further misunderstood for standing up for those people, and you may even be punished for being outspoken on behalf of people that you care about. But you still have to do it anyways, because even if there are no effects, even if the only effect is that your life becomes harder, you still have to do it because of that little light, that little glimmer of hope. And so I just feel like until the world's a safe space for everyone, it's going to be a safe space for really no one to be their true, authentic selves. Also, there's this YouTuber that I like to listen to while I fall asleep, and he grew up in like Catholic, like Christianity, and he later in life was like introduced to Buddhism, and he bridges Christian terminology with his Buddhism. And I thought that was really beautiful because growing up, I felt that like in Christianity, all sins are created equal. So if you're 5 years old and you steal a cookie from the cookie jar, that is just as sinful as, let's say, murdering someone. Both of those sins need to be atoned for by asking for forgiveness. And when you sin, you're basically nailing Jesus to the cross. And when you're told that as like a 5-year-old that you're responsible for killing the Son of God, it's kind of intense, and it leads to like this cycle of like shame and self-loathing, and it truly honestly distances you from spiritual truth, which is supposed to be restorative, and it's supposed to be rejuvenating, and it's supposed to provide you with strength to keep going. But with the way I was like raised in this conservative Christian environment, it actually depleted me of my energy, and it took me away from the true nature of reality, which is that we exist in this unified whole, and that separateness is an illusion. And the way this like YouTuber reframed the concept of Jesus for me, instead of as like this punitive figure, this like violent figure or whatever, because like in Christianity in the Old Testament, it's like God will command one of his followers to killed thousands of those in his community because they worshipped like a idol or something like that. And I was like, that never really sat well with me growing up, that there's only like one true God and other belief systems are inherently false and they lead you astray, and hence why being evangelical and is so important. That's why missionary work is so important. And I was like, this seems so intense. Like, I need to convert the rest of the world's population to Christianity in order for all of us to be saved. Like, that's, if you truly believe that to be true, then that's like an incredible amount of pressure to put on yourself. And I was like, that just doesn't seem to be true. Like, I think you can have the true essence of reality and the divine be revealed to you through a myriad of ways and belief systems, and even through nature in and of itself, and still be able to reach that level of spiritual understanding without it being affiliated with a specific belief system of any kind. Because I think it's like different roads, but they eventually all lead you to the same destination. So basically how this like YouTuber was able to reconnect me with, or maybe just like provide me with a better understanding of Jesus. He's like, Jesus is simply presence. And so when you're separated from God through sin, that's simply, sin is an existence of not being present with what is, whereas Jesus is the essence of like mindfulness and presence. And I was like, wow, I never thought of him that way. And I cried when I first heard that, because I think there's that instance and one other instance that I read in Life of Pi where an outsider or someone with a different perspective is able to portray Jesus in a way that's so comforting and like reassuring. And it makes me cry because growing up, I didn't view Jesus like that. It was like a one-sided relationship in which I'm always trying to like placate him and atone for my sins. And I never felt like I had a personal relationship with Jesus in the way that a lot of my peers claimed to have, because I felt like he was ultimately this punishing figure. And I don't know. So I guess I'm going to read this like little excerpt about it, the balance between like meditation and selfless action. In dark night live those for whom the world without alone is real. In night darker still, for whom the world within alone is real. The first leads to a life of action, the second to a life of meditation. But those who combine action with meditation cross the sea of death through action and enter into immortality through the practice of meditation. So have we heard from the wise. And I think that's beautiful. So let your spiritual practice be ugly, because the world is ugly and it's brutal, it's harsh, it's callous, and our spiritual practice needs to be just as authentic to cope with that harsh reality, and to let it be our one source of solace that we can share with other people.